It's setting us up 25%.
And we're live. Well, welcome to the last session of this Plug Fest, but don't start coasting yet. This session will be on identified gaps in V2X end entity security implementations and the essential roadmap. I'm Jimmy Upton. I'm the chair of the Omni-Air Cybersecurity Working Group. We have the responsibility for developing certification tests to provide assurance that devices have properly implemented security features. If the material in this session is of interest to you and you're an Omni-Air member, I would encourage you to join us in this work. You can contact me or Kate or any of the Omni-Air staff, and they will make sure that you get signed up. I will be monitoring the Q&A and the chat during Bill's presentation, so if you have any questions or anything, feel free to put them in there, and I will either answer them by text or I will interrupt Bill at the appropriate time. I've known Bill for longer than either one of us care to admit. Suffice it to say, we both know how to use an acoustic modem. Bill Lattin is the Chief Security Architect for Integrity Security Services and has been involved with V2X and CITS systems since 2013. He runs the ISS V2X and CITS certificate management systems. He has been involved with provisioning V2X systems all across the U.S., including the USDOT CV pilots and state projects such as Florida's DOT statewide SCMS project. He is the chair of SCMS Manager, which is an industry-led consortium to establish and enforce the security aspects of the U.S. V2X system. He is active in IEEE 1609, SAE, and a member of the European Commission subgroup of experts for SCMS. And so without further ado, I'll hand you over to Bill Lattin for the talk. Take it away, Bill.
Thanks, Jimmy, and hi, everyone. Sorry that we can't see each other in person. So this presentation is to share some learnings that we've seen over the last few years and also look at roadmap that will affect end-entity devices, OBUs, and RSUs going forward as we build out a harmonious and well-functioning V2X ecosystem within the U.S. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat window or whatever. And as Jimmy said, he'll be looking for them, and we can address them either during the talk or afterwards. I'm not sure the talk will run for the full hour. I'm thinking we'll have probably about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So with that, let's get started. So basically, over the last few years, as Jimmy indicated, ISS has done quite a bit of work in this space, providing V2X certificates to OBUs and RSUs around the country for USDOT projects as well as state and local DOT projects. And these projects have all been successful, but certain gaps have been shown to exist with end-entity support for camp security protocols. So we'll look at those today, some of these gaps which are essential to close. And this is important so that the community can move forward in deploying interoperable products that fully meet CAMP's specification, as well as meet CAMP's and USDOT's vision for the ecosystem. In addition to gaps in the existing infrastructure, we'll also look at future roadmap. This is stuff that's coming down the road that will be impacting OBUs and RSUs, as well as SCMSs. And so we'll take a look at some nearer term touch points there. The first gap I'd like to talk about is identification certificates. So we're all familiar, of course, with application certs and RSUs, with pseudonym certs and OBUs, but there is a third certificate, which is the identification certificate. And this was designed by CAMP for vehicles with special capabilities. So that could be reporting road weather, they could be, road weather monitoring stations. It could be emergency vehicles, buses, trams, freight that need to signal request capabilities. And CAMP's concerns here, and I think echoed by USDOT, is of course, there is great public interest in knowing which vehicles have these capabilities. And so CAMP specified the identification certificate for these explicit purposes. A vehicle can have up to 4 months of identification certificates at any one time. Unlike pseudonym certificates, these certificates are valid each for 1 week. I'm sorry, for 4 weeks each. And so you can have 4 certs for 4 months. And you can see from ASN.1, and this is from CAMP V1.2.2, you can see when you go through it that the ID here, I don't know if my mouse comes across, but basically the ID you can see is now a binary ID, where, so it's not a pseudonym, it's a binary ID, and specifically you can see it's the least significant bits of the SHA-256 hash of the enrollment certificate. So this is the concept behind the identification certificate. It has its own PSID SSPs associated with it, and it is for these special purpose vehicles. So several deployments have attempted to use these certificates, and the gap is, of course, what we've seen is that not all OBUs are supporting identification certificates. The temporary solution has been to add, SRM, RWA, PSID, SSPs to the pseudonym certs, but of course this is not compliant with CAMP specification. It's just a workaround. So in the long run, and entities must support, OBUs must support identification certs for long-term compliance. And we'd like to see that occur in the ecosystem. Other considerations that, of course, accompany this, first and foremost, is the OBU must have regular top-off capability, because now it needs to receive new identification certs on a regular basis, unlike with pseudonym certs where it has 3,000, roughly 3,000, and can top off every year or so. Here we're going to have to top off on a monthly basis, if not sooner. And then, of course, other considerations is that when these units are manufactured or when they're being deployed, the OBU vendor or the IOO must have the ability to distinguish among these units so that only OBUs with these special capabilities go to their designated vehicles. We've seen some problems in the past where originally all OBUs were going to get these permissions, and of course that's not right. And then there was some confusion about which OBUs had been provisioned which way by installers. So this is just something that has to also be carried through into the actual deployment itself.
Before you move on, Bill, I think this is a good point to ask a question that came in the Q&A.
Yes.
It says for the U.S. city, state, county V2X, CV2X pilots that are underway and using RSUs in broadcast-only mode without security or SCMS, what are the realistic cybersecurity concerns there?
Well, so I think first and foremost, I mean, it's broadcast only, so perhaps there's no influence back on signal conditions. But I will say that if you're looking for interoperable deployments where a vehicle can transit from New York and go through major metropolitan areas and receive service, most OBUs have security enabled. And of course, this is the default for the ecosystem, is to have security enabled. And so those OBUs will be rejecting unsigned messages from RSUs. So what you're looking at is really, if you're not using security, you just are going to have an island deployment. And this is very important, I think, too, when it comes to very critical messages like maps, like TIMs. A hacker would love to be able to post their own TIMs on your dashboard, whether it's in support of the local football team or denouncing something else, or posting a Valentine on everyone's dashboard to his or her partner. So security is very important, and it is the long-term requirement for the ecosystem. So I think deployments now that are running without security, they should be talking to SCMS providers about getting security enabled. and fully building out the ecosystem. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you, Bill.
All right. So if we switch now to another topic, this is the LCCF update processing. So the local certificate chain file is what is used by an SCMS to convey the current certificates in the ecosystem out to OBUs and RSUs. And so this is providing the certificates for that the end entity needs to do validation of the certs that it's received from the SCMS, but it also conveys other routes. It conveys the elector certificates. It can convey other information about other SCMSs in the ecosystem. And so it's a very important file to properly process. And it's important to note that just like every PKI in the world, SCMS is no different. The CAs that comprise the SCMS, they all have certificates that expire over time. And so they will always be there will always be new SCMS certificates for PCAs, ICAs, RAs, et cetera, in the ecosystem. Our observations have been from many trials is that entity devices don't always support LCCFs with multiple CAs of the same type or the same name, but with different certificate validity periods. And oftentimes they don't seem to be able to process LCCF updates themselves. They take in the initial LCCF during bootstrap and they're fine with that. But when an LCCF is sent out by the SCMS into the ecosystem, the units can't process that. And if we look at the ASN.1 again from CAMP, you can see that there is a version for the composite LCCF. So it's very simple to know if this is a new LCCF, so an update, or if it's the one you've been programmed with. And then you can see that it's carrying root CA endorsements, elector endorsements. It carries the certificates for the MA, and then other certificates for the ecosystem. And if we look at CAMP's drawing, and I apologize for the small font, and I know this is difficult to read, and unfortunately I don't have a way to expand it with this video broadcasting system. But conceptually here on the large dashed outline here, this is the global certificate chain file, and it carries everything about the ecosystem. Then you have your local certificate chain file, which at a minimum, which is this small box on the left, at a minimum carries, you can see the electors, roots, ICA certificates, and PCA certificates. And optionally, the LCCF may carry other PCA certificates, other ICA certificates as well. So it is a very important file. It is what is telling the RSU and the OBU the current state of the ecosystem and what certificates are being used by the ecosystem. The LCCF does not tell you anything about the validity of these certificates. You still must parse them. You still must validate them. But it does provide the information that allows you to validate them all the way up to the root. Another critical topic that's coming and is closely linked with the LCCF and with the fact that certificates do expire within SCMSs is that end entity certificates, in particular, end entity enrollment certificates will expire. Unlike pseudonym certificates, and your enrollment certificate may last for many years. Ideally, it would last for many years, 7 years, 10 years more, depending on the SCMS. But your end entity device does need to participate in a re-enrollment protocol so that it does not go off the air. And you want to implement this protocol because it allows your end entity device to obtain a new enrollment certificate without any human intervention. So it's an automated process. So basically, this is built on using your current enrollment certificate. So you generate a new enrollment key pair, you construct a proper certificate signing request, you sign it with your existing enrollment key, and then you submit it to the RA. CAMP did some initial work around here, but there were some gaps in the specification. So SCMS Manager that Jimmy talked about at the start, which is the industry-led consortium, has finalized the definition of this and will publish it shortly. Conceptually, the device makes a re-enrollment request of the RA. The RA then passes it up to the Enrollment Certificate Authority. The Enrollment Certificate Authority validates that it's been properly constructed, returns the new enrollment certificate, which the RA then forwards on. And in looking at this in more detail, here are the key assumptions for rollover or re-enrollment. Number one is the end entity possesses a valid enrollment certificate that is not blacklisted, so you're an end entity in good standing. That you've not previously requested re-enrollment, because you can only do this once. The enrollment CA certificate has to be valid for the entire duration of the re-enrollment request. So of course we cannot issue certificates beyond the validity of the ECA. This duration needs to be as long as possible, as allowed by SCMS, your local SCMS policy. Critically, the new enrollment certificate has to have exactly the same PSID, SSPs, and geographic restrictions as the original. So this is not a way to claim new application support. You have to re-enroll for that, but your old request has to have the same permissions. I'm sorry, your new request has to have the same permissions as the old request. The entities have to have the ability to generate new key pairs. Obviously, they're deployed, so key injection can't be done securely. And then when should you request this? Obviously, you want to request it before your enrollment certificate expires. And so we're recommending at least 12 weeks before the current enrollment certificate expires. This obviously is going to depend on the connectivity of the deployment. So there may be some adjustment to that. So that's a design consideration. And then lastly, the end entity can only possess one enrollment certificate at a time and may only download a single re-enrollment certificate using its currently valid enrollment certificate. If we look at the ASN.1, basically there are two new routes that are being proposed. This is for the end entity to contact the RA, and then of course for the RA to return the certificate. So basically we're looking at two new paths, EE-RE enrollment request, and then EE-RE enrollment download, so post and get, following similar processes for posting and retrieving the certificates. This diagram, unfortunately, I cannot expand. I was planning on doing that, but basically this is the re-enrollment process. This is from CAMP. The protocol refinements that SCMS Manager has made fit within this diagram. Just quickly, what this diagram is showing is that we have the end entity in black and the SCMS, the RA, and the ECA in green at the top. On the first black column is where the end entity is communicating with the RA and is actually downloading the current LCF. So the LCF is distributed every time the end entity is communicating with the RA. So here the end entity is downloading it, the end entity is updating its cert store if required. And then the end entity goes on to make its re-enrollment request here, where it is creating its new key pair. It is submitting the CSR to the RA. The RA is validating that the end entity's enrollment key, current key, is not blacklisted. It's passing it then over to the right-hand side here, where it goes off up to the ECA, and the ECA is validating permissions and confirming they're consistent, and then is returning the cert. And then in the bottom here, we have a new communication, because this is asynchronous. So we have a new communication from the end entity to the RA. Again, the end entity is downloading the LCCF checking to see if it needs to update its local cert store, and then it obtains its enrollment certificate. This slide will be clearer when we distribute, when Omniair distributes the PDF, but also this is available from CAMP's wiki. And so basically, this is designed to fit within the current CAMP SCMS protocols. We're defining some new structures. So basically here you can see we have secured re-enrollment request, signed re-enrollment request. And then on the acknowledgements, we have a secured re-enrollment cert provisioning act, and we have a signed re-enrollment cert provisioning act. And again, SCMS Manager has done this work and will be publishing this information on its website around the end of next week. I'd like now to switch to another topic, and this is CRL processing. So CAMP has defined a number of CRL series. Series 1, of course, we're familiar with, that covers pseudonym certs. Series 2 covers components of the SCMS. Series 3 covers units, devices using application certs and identification certs. Series 4 is covering enrollment certs for end entities. And then Series 256, this is a series that's actually published by the root CA, and this covers infrastructure directly under control of the root CA, so the MA, the policy generator, and the CRL generator. CRLs are absolutely fundamental to the V2X ecosystem as defined by CAMP and USDOT. These series are issued today, Series 256, Series 1, Series 2, Series 3. They're issued by the ISS-CMS. End entities should process these. You know, Series 256 is certainly critical. Series 2 is critical. End entities need to process these. They need to be aware of these. Today, because there hasn't been any need to revoke anything, these are empty, but end entities still need to know how to process them. Misbehavior detection is coming. So this is not a far off fiction, but it is coming. And this is one of the key, I think, differentiators of the US V2X ecosystem from the European one, is we do have misbehavior detection, misbehavior reporting, and revocation based on that. It's critical to maintaining the health of the V2X ecosystem. So Series 1, active Series 1 and Series 3 CRLs are not far off. Series 1 CRLs, there's a little bit of a wrinkle. The original specifications for how you compute the pre-linkage values was not clear, and there was subject to a lot of misinterpretation or potential misinterpretation for how you should do it. Also, there were asymmetries in how the linkage values were computed between LA1 and LA2. And so this was corrected for 1609.2 with guidance note 12. This is a draft, so don't look for a final version. You're only going to find the draft dated 28 February of 2020. But guidance note 12 does clarify how to compute this for your Series 1. This guidance note 12 was carried into the latest release of IEEE 1609 in the form of 1609.2.1, which is on schedule to be released probably at the tail end of this year. Also with CRLs, another thing is that OBUs need to contact the RA at some regular frequency. So ideally, this is at least weekly to get updates about the ecosystem. RSUs, of course, are already contacting the RA weekly because they only have 2 weeks of certificates in them, this week and next week. So the RAs don't have this issue, but it is an issue for planning for OBU deployments. And just pictorially, if we look at CAMP's diagram, we can see here the different CRL series families. You can see the root is producing CRL series 256, controlling policy generator, the MA, and the CRL generator. Then series 2 is for SCMS infrastructure components, be it ICAs, PCAs, ECAs, etc. You have Series 1 in green flowing down to vehicles, and then you have Series 3 flowing to RSUs and to special vehicles using identification certs. Another gap that we've seen in the ecosystem is that some NA devices actually have no ability to receive top-offs. Either the OBU was deployed without that capability, the software didn't support it, or the project owner did not plan for OBU connectivity, and so basically the initial requirements were for the OBUs to store a large number of certificates and basically run for life, life being some number of years without the need for update. This, of course, is not good for actually maintaining a healthy ecosystem. Regular connectivity is required to receive CRLs, to do misbehavior reporting, to receive LCCFs, etc. So for IOOs, for others planning projects, we do strongly recommend that the OBU connectivity issue be addressed up front. Also, because the ecosystem is evolving, new applications are coming out, SSPs are being refined, et cetera, electors are going to be coming out, and new updates and firmware are going to have to be added. It is very important that all entities be capable of remote firmware update, whether it's by an RSU that's connected by fiber or Ethernet, or an OBU that is either going to update, say, via DSRC, or has access to an LTE modem or Wi-Fi to update. But all entity devices should be capable of receiving an over-the-air firmware update. OTA updates have many considerations for security. I've only listed a couple here, but we'll talk about entity protection in a bit. There are other considerations that are coming, other requirements. First and foremost is that the OTA update must be signed. If it's not signed by the vendor or another authorized party, then of course your entity device is open to being updated by anyone in the world, which is not desirable. The signature that's used should not be any weaker than cryptographically than the crypto system that's being used in the V2X ecosystem itself, which is AES 128 and elliptic curve P256. So RSA wise, that would be an RSA signature of 3072 bits. So this is just making sure there are no weak links in the chain. And the signing key, the key that's used by the vendor or the authorized party to sign the update, that private key must be properly protected. It can't be sitting on some engineer's laptop. It can't be in a software repo that a system admin can access. It has to be handled in an appropriate way because it really is a very, very high value target. And there'll be more requirements on this coming forward from a variety of different groups, I'm sure. So in summary, for gaps, basically, we're recommending that entity vendors should verify or add support for the preceding required features, as their absence does prevent the proper and reliable operation of the V2X ecosystem as specified by CAMP USDOT. So this is really on vendors, but it's also on IOOs to specify things properly and then also, we think that OmniAir should be expanding its testing to encompass this. And I know the security working group with Jimmy is working on this. But we need to test support for identification certificates, LCCF processing, enrollment certificate rollover, and CRL handling. Those are kind of the immediate low-hanging fruit that are important to maintaining the quality of the US V2X ecosystem. So with that, I'd like to switch gears a little bit and look at some other roadmap requirements that are coming that are not ready for prime time. Necessarily some are, but some are not. But I think everyone needs to be aware of these things because they are, again, what I would consider a near-term roadmap that will be essential for OBU vendors and RSU vendors and SCMS providers. So first and foremost, or not first and foremost, but first up are CRLs. Again, we're not quite done with those. So we were recommending that an OBU and RSU in the prior slides contact the RA once a week to obtain, the latest CRL, to obtain the latest LCCF, obtain other ecosystem information. That's okay, but it's not necessarily the best approach because it is just once a week. How should we have or ensure timeliness of updates? Infrastructure CRLs for an SCMS, they are infrequently produced because SCMSs are well-controlled devices or well-controlled systems. But of course, if they do occur, their distribution is urgent, right? This goes right to the heart of the ecosystem. Similarly, if there's an RSU or an OBU or a series of them that some hacker has gained control of and is using to cause havoc, say if you think about Manhattan, in a tunnel or a bridge and blocking traffic, causing huge backups, we need to revoke those quickly. So 609.2 is specifying some new projects here. One is going to work on collaborative CRL distribution. This is where CRLs can be passed from end entity to end entity directly, that you don't have to come back to the SCMS directly to obtain the latest CRL. You can obtain that from someone in communications range. The other is that they're looking at timeliness of updates and how to distribute these in a timely way, but without flooding the ecosystem, consuming excessive bandwidth, et cetera. So that's a research topic that 1609 is working on. Misbehavior reporting, as I mentioned, this is coming soon to a theater near you. ISS worked with Noblus and Qualcomm. We demonstrated this capability last year, the ISS Misbehavior Authority Service, with Savari and Siemens at the Turner Fairbank Highway Research Center. We subsequently tested with Aptiv. And this is the ability now for OBUs and ultimately RSUs to submit misbehavior reports to the Misbehavior Authority Service and have global misbehavior detection applied and misbehaving units revoked. So SCMS Manager has published this. So the misbehavior report format and the application have been defined. You can find this on the SCMS Manager website under the publications page. Both the spec and the ASN.1 are there. Misbehavior is widely recognized, I think, as extremely important. This work started in the US, and I think kudos to CAMP and USDOT for it. Europe did not start this way. Europe was going to just work with very short-lived certificates and was going to limit how many certificates an OBU could have at any one time. But ETSI is now starting misbehavior work. Actually, they've done quite a bit of work in misbehavior. They are looking like they're going to adopt the SCMS Manager misbehavior reporting format, which is very good. 5GAA is working on this. SCMS Manager itself is starting a working group in misbehavior authority or misbehavior detection. And SAE is also considering work in this area. So I think we're going to see a lot more activity here. So stay tuned. The misbehavior report structure, just to highlight it, at the top level, there's a version number, there's a generation time, and then it contains a pair, which is the PSID and the contents. So the PSID field is the PSID for the application for which the misbehavior is being reported, and then the contents are PSID specific as to what the misbehavior is. It leverages the ASN.1 class structure to ensure that everything is associated properly. The initial work was specifically designed to be lightweight in the sense that we didn't want the misbehavior reporting to be deeply integrated, to have to be deeply integrated into the vehicle. So we defined misbehavior events for events that the OBU itself could directly detect without having to communicate with the CAN bus with other elements of the vehicle. So this was the purpose for the purposes of testing at Turner Fairbank. And so we just have this for BSM right now. And so basically, a tuple is sent of type, subtype, and evidence. And so basically, the subtype is an identifier for the specific misbehavior, and there may be other evidence provided in the substructure. And again, these are treated as a class using ASN.1. All this information can be found on scmsmanager.org in the publication section. And just looking at the events themselves from SCMS Manager, as I mentioned, these were designed to be detected by the OBU itself without integration, deep integration into the vehicle with access to the CAN bus and other vehicle systems like ABS, et cetera. So these are just a small subset of where future misbehavior work is going to go. You can find these on, again, at SCMS Manager, but you can see there are things like location mismatch, random position overlap. Many of these things, I think, came out from earlier work with UMTRI, but were carried forward here as well. And so we have braking, position, speed acceleration, for these are out of bound value checks, et cetera. So pretty straightforward. You'll see this work expand by all these different groups that are working in this, particularly I think ETSI, SAE, and SCMS Manager will do quite a bit of work here. The misbehavior upload, this was a nice system in the sense that it's recognized that local storage is limited on entities. So basically, when a misbehavior report is generated, it's assigned a specific weight, and the weight can be adjusted by a multiplier depending on the occurrence that's witnessed on a daily basis. And then when an end entity has connectivity, it can upload the highest weight misbehavior report first. If two misbehavior reports have the same weight, the newest misbehavior report is uploaded first. But also in terms of the end entity managing its storage, if 2 MBR have the same weight, the oldest is deleted first. So we're trying to be resource sensitive for OBUs and RSUs. Switching to electors and certificate trust lists. So as everyone I think is aware, CAMP specified the use of electors in order to provide a robust and automated method to manage the root CAs in the V2X ecosystem. And if you think about it, this, with potentially hundreds of IOOs, plus the need for cross-border interop, say with Canada and Mexico, electors are the only way to accomplish this without introducing significant cybersecurity weaknesses. It's the only way to provide an automated system to do this. And so SCMS Manager has taken the lead here. We've raised 5 electors for the US national V2X ecosystem. There are also on the website 5 test electors for development purposes. And then working with IEEE, the 609.2 working group, SCMS Manager and IEEE have specified the certificate trust list. So, just a snippet of ASN.1, you can see that it has a sequence number, has an effective date. You can see there are messages in there to approve the addition of electors, to remove electors, to approve the addition of a root CA, to remove a root CA. So this has now been spec'd, and you can find details on this on the SCMS Manager website. SCMS Manager has gone beyond, of course, just the technical specifications. We've also defined the policy itself for elector operation. So this works as follows. Basically, SCMS Manager itself, through a number of different mechanisms, will determine which roots or electors need to be added or deleted to the ecosystem. The SCMS Manager will push the decision out to the individual electors. The individual electors will confirm the SCMS Manager's decision in a number of different ways with SCMS Manager, and then each elector will sign the approved ballot that it's been sent. SCMS Manager will take those in, will assemble the full CTL containing all the elector signatures for the designated action, and we'll distribute this to the SCMSs in the ecosystem for them to distribute on to the end entities. And again, that'll be via the LCCF. So in terms of planning purposes for OBU and RSU manufacturers, vendors, take a look at the protocol. You're going to have to retrieve and process CTLs. And then, just like root certificates, the elector certificates are going to have to be protected against unauthorized substitution, because obviously the end entity is going to be relying on the elector certificates in order to determine which electors can be added, which roots can be added. So we don't want those substituted so that a hacker can upload their own roots, etc. And entity minimum security implementation requirements. So this is very important in the sense that all end entities, and including SCMS components, anything in the V2X ecosystem, must have a minimum level of security in its implementation. And this is to ensure there are no weak links in the chain. And I think I heard this secondhand from Connected Intersections, but basically one OEM stated that the information that their vehicles receive must be accurate and reliable, as the vehicles will be making decisions based upon it. And so certainly it's important for RSUs, but it's equally important for OBUs, because obviously vehicles will be making decisions based on messages received from OBUs. And we do want to prevent the possibility of a weak link in the chain. CAMP and USDOT did initial work here. FMVSS 150 specified FIPS 140-2 level 3, but basically didn't provide a lot of specifics. There is need for specificity here. Lots of organizations are working in this area: Connected Intersections, SCMS Manager, 5GAA. SAE is looking at really at the application security level, although there may be some requirements developed for hardware related needed to support the application. And in Europe, the Car-to-Car Communications Consortium is working on this. The good news is that, of course, most OBUs, most RSUs that we've encountered do use a hardware security module in them. The use of an HSM is absolutely fundamental. It's something that we require as a CMS provider. The HSM provides for proper generation of the cryptographic keys. It allows you to store secrets and private keys and protect them from physical attack. It also ensures that the cryptographic operations can be performed properly in a timely way and generally free from external influence. So we don't want a hacker by external influence. Of course, I'm thinking of a hacker who comes in and tries to disrupt your verification process and force you to use a bad certificate by subverting the validation process. So, that's the good news. The hardware is there, but we do need focus on a lot of different areas. We need secure boot. Why? Well, secure boot verifies that when a unit is powered up, it's only running authorized software. Remember, we're asking the OTA updates be signed. Secure boot is now verifying a cryptographic signature on the software that's loaded in the system on power on. So it ensures that rogue code can't be there at power on. We're looking at protection of critical public data. So like I mentioned earlier, elector certificates, root CA certificates must be protected against simple substitution. Many devices, OBUs, RSUs, ASDs, use multiple CPUs, one for doing security processing, one for running general applications. We're looking at the security of the whole unit. OTA update security we've discussed. Physical security, this is a complex issue. Obviously, it's a cost driver. We're looking, the HSM provides a significant amount of, or can provide a significant amount of physical infrastructure, physical security protection against an attacker being able to access private keys, et cetera, as we've mentioned. FIPS 140-2 level 2, that's tamper evidence. That really, in our view, is not appropriate, because when the OBU is buried under the dash, it's impossible to inspect. When an RSU is in a remote location that may only see a maintenance worker once a year, if ever, tamper evidence is way too late. So we're looking at chip level protections, and many chips can offer FIPS 140-2 level 4 level 3, level 4 protection. So that's kind of where our thinking is at. We're looking at the security of the management protocols, again, to avoid weak links in the chain. Is IPsec being set up appropriately? If that's being used, or is SSH being set up appropriately? Are the authentication mechanisms appropriately strong? We're looking at those things. Europe in particular, C2C, is defining a protection profile and looking at certification and other requirements. The US is behind in this area, but I think we'll be catching up. And of course, this will lead to extensions in OmniAir for additional testing or vendor attestation as to the security construction and operation of their devices. And then if we look at the big thing that's coming along, this is 1609.2.1. And it is through ballot. It is expected to be published late this year. It's not backwards compatible with CAMP's current implementation. And I think really what's happened is that, 1609.2, that was really built off of CAMP's work and was very US-centric. 1609.2.1 is much bigger. It's really designed to be the base specification for the world. So it encompasses many European requirements. It's aligned with ETSI, and ETSI is also aligning with it. But it also is incorporating support for China and China's V2X activity. So basically, in good standards fashion, it has now become a camel, a horse in the shape of a camel. And it allows for many, many new things. As I mentioned, it unifies ETSI and IEEE standards, but also is working hard to, or I should say that members of the IEEE 699 working group are working hard to make sure that China can stay aligned with it. That's the goal. There's more flexibility on enrollment certificates. X509 certificates can be used, for instance. We'll talk a little bit about that. PSIDISSP handling is changing. As I mentioned earlier, it does fully specify the CTL and adopt new trust models. It adds other butterfly expansion methods and other certificate revocation methods. This is a diagram. Again, I assume it's not too legible. The one on the left is the original. The one on the right is the new. They're largely the same. The main thing is that the pseudonym CA is now being called an authorization CA, and just from a nomenclature perspective. But the message flows are largely the same. New options are available in terms of support for other protocols, et cetera. We'll talk a little bit about that. In terms of enrollment cert and PSIDSSP flexibility, some OEMs didn't want to set up an enrollment CA. They're already issuing X509 certificates to certain ECUs. So they wanted to use those X509 certs for the enrollment. Of course, that means that things that should be in the enrollment cert, like the PSID-SSPs, are no longer there because these X509 certs have already been defined. They're already in use. So 1609.2.1 is accommodating legacy, if you will, by bringing that in. And so therefore, it's allowing PSID-SSPs to be mapped and centrally managed in the SCMS rather than being carried in the enrollment cert itself. This is actually a beneficial change for the ecosystem. Because if you think about the evolution of the ecosystem where new applications are being added, we don't want to have to manually re-enroll units to add new applications to them. So this will allow that to be automated. 1609.2.1 does establish the new trust model for the electors. And this is what we've discussed. This is where the SCMS manager is determining which root CAs and electors to add or delete. And then the SCMS manager sends the decision to each elector for signature. And so critically, the electors themselves are no longer independent bodies. They're no longer making these trust decisions for themselves. They simply have to validate what SCMS manager has requested them to do. And this improves the overall security posture of the ecosystem since it provides a uniform way for making the decision. We don't have to worry about how electors are individually doing this work, how these independent bodies, for instance, would be doing this work. So it gives us a uniform way to do this, a centralized way to do this, and a standardized way of making these decisions. There are many other changes. There's a web API now. Web API is supported using OAuth. Secure sessions have been defined. Their data structures changes. the new spec is over 300 pages, or approximately 300 pages. So it's very detailed. A huge amount of work has gone into it. And again, it is encompassing the global view for connected vehicles, V2X systems. So I think what's going to be required for the US system is that just as CAMP produced a profile for 1609.2, SCMS Manager will have to do this for 1609.2.1. The time frame for when to move from CAMP 1.2.2 forward to 1609.2.1 and an SCMS Manager profile, that's something that has to be fed into the ecosystem, and will be the purview of IOOs and OBU and RSU vendors and OEMs. So that's something that, the time horizon is probably in the next 2 to 3 years would be my guess. So with that, I'd like to say thanks very much. Hope I haven't bored you to death. It's again tough not being able to see you all directly, but hope this was of interest and of use, and let us know if you have any questions.
Well, we do have one question, Bill. Wanted to know if you're familiar with any of the states or counties or cities now using CRL functionality in their V2X rollouts. Has anybody got CRL functionality incorporated, or is that future in
No,
all
it's
locations?
so it's been tested in Florida, for instance. So it is coming out. More and more programs are requiring it. More and more programs are requiring misbehavior detection. So these are all near-term roadmap items.
Good.
If they're not already supported by the end entity.
Okay. All right, we'll have a few minutes left to take any other questions. I will emphasize one other aspect of this that I know Bill mentioned, and I think I mentioned at the top, but all of these things that are coming along for the future, things that are in work now and things that are coming not far in the future, we at OmniAir will need to make sure that we're testing for those, so that when devices get certified, we'll know that they're interoperable, that they're properly functioning for security. So again, the group that I chair, the cybersecurity working group, is working on those tests, and we would welcome the participation of anyone in this on this call to be involved in that. I have another question.
Yep.
Can we expect that 1609.2.1 will replace ETSI standards like TS 102-941 in Europe? You said that it was intended to be a world standard.
So I think ETSI will always maintain their standards, but ETSI standards are now being aligned with 1609.2.1. I know, the working group has spent considerable effort in that, William White, Virendra, and others. So I don't see those documents going away. ETSI is not going to replace the standards, but its standards will be aligned with 1609.2.1.
Thanks, Bill.
Also, I've pointed folks many times in this presentation to SCMS Manager. We have OEM members, we have engineering companies as members, we have other consulting firms as members, various government groups participate. We certainly would welcome you all to join, and membership details can be found on SCMS Manager as well.
Okay, having seen no further questions, I think we've done it, and this concludes not only this talk, but it concludes the Plug Fest. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.